Public perception of aging research, its relationship to policy decisions, and how we can achieve the promise of the longevity dividend as soon as humanly possible. After Tina's talk, I'm also wondering how I can have my job title changed to champion, which is pretty awesome. But just to start things off, but I would like to have the audience learn a little bit more about your respective work and how it relates to achieving the longevity dividend. Obviously, some of the earlier talks covered this to some extent, but to briefly recap, Jay, can you start off by describing the original concept of the longevity dividend and perhaps how maybe it has evolved over time to our present moment, or how it's remained the same? What lessons have?
For me, the original concept was first published in our article in Science in 1990, In Search of Methuselah, Estimating the Upper Limits to Human Longevity, where we basically said human life expectancy cannot practically rise above about 85 for men and women combined, unless we find a way to modulate biological aging. The logic and the rationale behind that originated with a book that was written by Bernice Newgarden, one of my mentors at the University of Chicago, where one of the chapters in the book, by the way, was written by my friend Len Hayflick, who basically said, hey, guess what? Maybe we should start going after aging rather than the diseases associated with it. The longevity dividend was based on the paper that I showed you that we published in 2006. And there was a lot of discussion and debate about the language to use in that particular paper. And, Bob Butler from the National Institute on Aging was probably one of the strongest advocates for this work on aging science. And ever since then, I've been completely embroiled in the debate about how long we can live, what happens if we fail to modulate aging in some way. That's perhaps one of the more interesting elements of what I do. But yeah, I mean, look, I go back to at least before 1990, and my own dissertation from 1984 was focused on, what happens if we make simultaneous progress against major fatal diseases all at once. So yeah, I do go back a few decades on this.
Yeah, no, thank you for that recap. And based on what you said, one of the things that I've noticed that has been a successful tactic is not just spelling out the wonderful vision of the future if we achieve certain milestones, but what is the cost of inaction, which is an effective tactic, right? So Breanna, I'd like to switch things over to you. If you could introduce yourself and describe how your work intersects with this topic of the longevity dividend.
Great. Thank you, Keith. So I'm Breanna, VP of Operations at the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. And, I first became interested in the topic of longevity and aging medicine when I was working in Congress. Worked in both the House side and the Senate side. And during that time, and really still today, one of the key topics of conversation was health, and more specifically, sort of healthcare and healthcare reform. And as I sort of dug deeper into the topic, I realized that, there was something really crucial missing from the conversation. And that was what is, leading to these diseases that we need healthcare for in the first place. And, in Congress, one of the, topics of conversation when it comes to healthcare is the cost of healthcare. And those costs really come from the chronic diseases that are associated with aging. So for me, I really became frustrated and realized that in order, one, to sort of tackle these diseases, limit the costs on families, individuals, and the government, we have to take a different approach. And of course, that approach is treating the fundamental cause, which is aging. So for me, that's kind of how I first became introduced to the topic. And why I'm still sort of interested in it today is because, it's still a major topic of conversation on the Hill. And we're just not taking, the right approach to solving the issue at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully based on the earlier conversations that will be changing soon, I hope. And to swing things over to Tina, obviously you just shared a lot with us, but I'd like to ask you a question that I'm genuinely curious about. Given that the UK's healthcare system is different from the US, having something more akin to, universal healthcare, Have you found, because you've been kind of straddling both sides of the pond, has that changed sort of the narrative of how we engage policymakers, them, the UK having a universal healthcare system versus what the US has? Anything on that topic, basically?
I mean, cultural context is so important. And of course, we have totally different systems. Of course, there are going to be differences in how we need to tackle in the language to engage, policymakers and the stakeholders involved. But I still think, what is similar, though, is I just think we need to understand what arguments are going to really engage the policymakers. And I do think there's a lot in how we see health, because at the moment in the UK, for example, when you talk about health, people automatically assume it's to do with the NHS and care system, the healthcare system, i.e. fixing you when you're sick. The problem is we've got a completely unsustainable healthcare system, and I would argue that's happening in the US as well. And so how do we actually reduce demand? And how do we see the system very, very differently and see health differently? So I think there's a whole way that we need to see health differently. And the narrative is starting to change, and we're starting to see a lot more about the lexicon of prevention, how do we keep healthier and well? And of course, linked to that and coming out of the pandemic, we saw that actually it was the people in the poorest health that suffered the most. And the people in the poorest health tend to be those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So I think there's been a huge consciousness about, well, what does health actually mean? And so we've got a whole narrative now developing that health is actually linked to wealth. And actually you have to treat everything together. If you cannot have a wealthy nation unless you tackle the health of the nation. And that means keeping healthy and well. And so I think there's a tension, because when we talk about treating age-related diseases, we're still talking about treatment. But actually the way that I see it is that all this wonderful research that is exponentially exploding, it's really unlocking the key to really understanding our health and how we can keep healthy and how we can influence the healthy trajectory. And of course, all the work with aging biomarkers and all the wonderful stuff that we're discovering are actually key to that. But I do see it as a much broader discipline. It's about the life course approach. It's about behavior. It's about psychology. It's about really understanding how human beings thrive. And I don't think, giving someone a therapeutic is necessarily the only option that we need. So we need to think, far more boldly, far more radically, and really understand human beings and human behavior. Because there's a lot of things that don't cost any money at all that would actually have a huge amount of impact. If we stop smoking, that would automatically reduce 50% of the healthy life expectancy inequalities between richest and poorest. So these are, obesity, tackling food. These are really big areas that would have a dramatic impact. And that has, so, I look at things, where are we going to get the real impact? And I think we have to see health differently.
Yeah, that all makes sense. That's why I liked, I think Chris from Novus might have mentioned this framing earlier of framing this work as the ultimate preventative healthcare, right? Finding ways to co-opt terms that people have already latched onto accurately. One final point on this, overall longevity dividend framing that I would like to see going forward is I think we're addressing this issue now of framing it as the cost of inaction compared to only just the bright future. But I know in the earlier work, and it's, in my opinion, still not quite resolved in even the latest papers from The Economist of, I think we need to do a better job of, we've explained, I think, if we achieve this level of aging reversal or remediation, what does that economically mean? But I think we need to do more work on the first part of that equation, which is given the trajectories and with this current amount of spending versus that amount of spending, what is a ballpark odds of success of achieving that so they get the full equation? Because 0 times wonderful equals 0. And that's when a lot of policymakers can check out if they don't believe that it's possible what you're saying, right? So given that kind of that topic of policymakers, given that aging is truly the ultimate nonpartisan issue and who it affects, I'm curious what everyone's thoughts are in regards to how to keep aging research nonpartisan, or if you even feel that matters in terms of getting things done. As an example, I understand that the recent Inflation Reduction and Climate Act in the US has provisions for aging research, but it's also considered a party line vote. Does this present challenges or opportunities? I guess, Breanna, that would probably be good to shift to you.
Yeah, well, I think absolutely it can be a bipartisan issue, and it has been, and I think it can remain that way. One of sort of the tragic things about aging in general and the chronic diseases associated with it is that it impacts everyone sort of universally, regardless of your religious background, ethnic background, socio-political background. Everyone ages and everyone's going to suffer the consequences of aging. And I guess, we were sort of talking about the difference between, or what health means in the various countries and the difference between health and healthcare. So typically in the US, when you think of health or healthcare, you think of this as a very politically contentious topic. But actually, while healthcare policy, regarding insurance is pretty politically contentious, health in general and sort of biomedical research is not as politically contentious. So you can look at the various committees, Energy and Commerce Committee, for example, and the subcommittees within that committee, and they are doing a lot of meaningful work, Democrats and Republicans working together. A4LI had a conversation with Congressman Paul Tonko recently, who sits on that committee, and he was discussing all of the meaningful work that they're doing together, regardless of what's going on the campaign trail, regardless of what you see, in the headlines. There is meaningful work happening. However, I do think, at least sort of our approach at A4LI is to, so far, keep this as a very niche issue, because as soon as you start attaching it to broader issues like insurance policy, healthcare reform, that's when things become contentious. But if you keep it as this narrow issue, which is, we're focusing on several main things right now, which is increasing funding for biomedical research and creating a regulatory pathway, and a few other things, that can remain relatively bipartisan. So I think that's very, very encouraging. But again, I think we do have to be sort of conscious of how we frame the conversation, because even though, maybe there's been a few bills that have gone through so far in a Democratic controlled Congress, that's not always going to be the case. And you don't want it always to be a numbers game where, you have to wait for a certain majority in order for things to get passed. We're going to need changes, throughout time and over time. So I think we have to really be considerate of how we frame the discussion. And I think it's in our best interest to keep this sort of as a niche topic.
I see. So Jay, that's actually a good segue to you, because I know that you've done some work sort of on the insurance economic incentives angle of this. Does Breanna's experience there reflect your own, especially in dealing with policymakers, as sort of bipartisan vibe on the research itself, or?
Well, any of the policymakers that we met with them because they were already inclined to buy into the line of reasoning that we were presenting. So frankly, virtually everyone that we've ever met with has been supportive. I've never met a single person in that area that has not said, yeah, this is a great idea to improve public health and make people healthier longer. It's like, how could you argue against that? It's a difficult, it's a difficult argument to make, to argue against what we're suggesting here. So the only issue that I've run into that is in any way partisan involves ageism. I mean, right now I'm doing 1 to 2 interviews a week on whether or not Joe Biden is too old to be running for president. And, one group says yes, and the other group says no. And I have to explain to everyone what the difference is between chronological and biological age. And it doesn't matter. Science doesn't matter if, politics gets in the way and you want to come to a conclusion about somebody based on, politics and age. They try to use age as a weapon. That's the only issue that I've run into lately. Otherwise, I have not had any problems. The only place where I've seen any substantive disagreement is from Bill Gates, who has argued, why are we wasting all this money on trying to modulate aging when we have to deal with communicable diseases in low-income countries? And now, of course, that's an easy argument to disagree with, but here you've got an influential voice who's saying, yeah, we've got other problems that maybe we should deal with first. And I think it's a communication issue for us. We need to communicate very effectively how an intervention like the one that we're talking about, or even what Tina was saying. I mean, look, Tina's right on target. There's lots of other ways in which we can improve public health. And all we're saying is we need to pursue them all to improve public health and not just one set. So I couldn't agree more with what Tina was arguing.
No, that's fascinating. And that just made me think of, I think we may have made not a misstep, but an evolution in our framing where we had this language earlier in the movement where, 70% of all deaths are age-related disease, and those age-related diseases are this, that, and this. But based on kind of what you were just saying there, I think there's something that we can reclaim in that narrative, like that COVID, to Tina's point earlier, I think has allowed us the opportunity to, is that almost everything is certainly an age-related disease, almost everything, right? Including communicable diseases, right? So I think that's the opportunity that could hopefully reconvince people like Bill Gates. And that's a good segue to Tina, because I think you had mentioned Bill Gates somewhere in your earlier talk. So maybe if you could speak to that point, and also if the experience in a multi-party system is different in terms of partisanship, et cetera.
So I think a lot of what has helped us actually in the UK is having this mission-based approach. We basically, we have I think as a nation, as a government, they ask itself, what are the big societal challenges that we need to address as a nation? So, and of course, that is how the goal of 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while minimizing health and well-being inequalities came about. It came about in 2017 when the industrial strategy was presented along with 4 grand challenges. And the aging society grand challenge was one of the 4. And of course, healthy aging was a subcomponent of that. So everything that certainly I've been involved with has been so focused on that singular sort of objective, and that has been so helpful in the sense that, and of course the all-party parliamentary group, which I've been very involved with, was involved in setting it up and running it and so forth. It sort of it dissolves the bipartisan, the sort of the partisan views. It dissolves the silos, because everyone can get around those goals. How can you argue with that goal? It is so important, and I think especially coming out of the pandemic, it is something that everyone can get behind. So whatever your political persuasion, no matter what kind of business you run, we can all get behind that. Yes, and it's about finding the sweet spot that everyone can work through and be focused on. So that's how we've been able to make a lot of progress. And so I think, and I think Bill Gates is right. I mean, we do need to focus, like, what are the big problems of today? And I think coming out of COVID, it's kind of clear there's some pretty major problems. And I think also one thing that certainly we're looking at, and the way that we see, and we're starting to use this term healthy longevity. And I think everyone can really understand what healthspan is. And I think even the whole debate in longevity science has progressed so far beyond the kind of like radical life extension lifespan thing. I mean, I think healthspan is where it's at. And I think, it's so linked with the climate change agenda. So I think there's a real opportunity here. Everything is interconnected. If you look at the One Health model that the CDC espouses, we know we are part of a complex ecosystem. And, and I think, all the things that will make us live a healthier, longer, happier life are actually very much tied in with the climate change agenda as well. So we're really looking at those sort of synergistics, those synergies. And actually we're looking at, going back to the health and to the ESG argument, we're looking at the kind of the benefits of big companies. And I mean, I'm talking about pension funds, institutional investors, where they can invest, where they're literally killing 2 birds with one, climate change, health, health is linked to wealth, healthy growth. These are the big areas that will deliver the impact and be something that you can get the big money behind as well. So,
hey Keith, I do have a suggestion. So when I hear talk of a 5-year target for healthy life expectancy, I would encourage the people that created this idea to reverse engineer what's required to generate a 5-year increase in healthy life expectancy. If you haven't done it, you're going to be very surprised at what you see. So I would strongly encourage that, because I'm very cautious about over-promising and under-delivering, and I would encourage us in the field to be very careful about this.
So just to add to that point, I think probably most people in my sphere of work will say that it is hugely ambitious. I mean, we're actually going backwards rather than forwards. So, but you need to set a bold target. So I think that's kind of like the consensus. We need a bold target, but recognizing that it's going to be very, very complex.
That
Yeah.
might tie to the earlier question I think that was posed to Dylan, where one way that might allow that to become achievable is by pairing it with sort of the low-hanging fruit, like stopping people from smoking and that sort of stuff. But that's a good experience and good caution on how to proceed with that, Jay. Jay, you had mentioned earlier, I believe, the issue of ageism, and Tina, you were just speaking about kind of the language that you use. So I want to pivot this to another question. If you had watched the interview that I did earlier today with Dr. Olshansky of the NIA, you'll note that he gave a kind of characteristically diplomatic answer on the pros and cons of the need of calling aging itself a disease. So kind of my open question to the floor is, given that there might be some proxies that we can use, a la the TAME situation that you shared with us, Jay, is it useful to have that fight? Do you have a strong opinion one way or the other? Are there dangers of getting wrapped up in the ageism conversation, et cetera? Open question to the floor.
Yeah. So, as you know, I've been commenting on this since the 1980s. I think it is a horrible idea to call aging a disease. Aging is no more of a disease than puberty or menopause. It's like calling the second law of thermodynamics a disease. It is the ultimate form of ageism, and it's not needed. You don't need to call aging a disease to support the logic and the rationale for the effort to modulate aging as primary prevention with a capital P. It's not needed. The FDA doesn't need it. It's just not required. And it does place people who make it to older ages diseased by definition, because their number is above whatever threshold somebody defines as a disease. So it's a horrible idea. Remember, there was an effort in the 1970s to create an ICD code for aging, which was nixed because it would make meaningless almost all ICD codes for people that die at later ages. And I think that there's been a recent effort to create an ICD code for aging. And I've said from day one, it's a horrible idea. So I would strongly suggest we get away from that concept. It's just not needed. It's harmful.
So obviously, a strong opinion there. Tina or Breanna, is there a counter opinion, especially given the light of the aging related codes that were added to the ICD? So any counter opinions on that?
I'll jump in, and I'm with Jay on this one. I think going back to ageism and how people think about age, I think it's just the wrong thing to do. I just think it brings everything back to this incredibly negative view of aging, and I think it's unnecessary, and I think it's backwards, and I think we have to. Ageism is literally our biggest barrier, to progress.
I completely agree with Tina and Jay. I think the AARP has also come out and said aging should not be considered a disease. I think we want to live in a world where people shouldn't have to be concerned about their chronological age. And even, in the case of Joe Biden, if he was acting like a young, healthy person, then people probably wouldn't really care about his age. But because there is ageism there, it's become an issue. So I think, we already have enough battles ahead of us. This just creates another one. And at the end of the day, if it can be considered as a, treatable condition, or as long as there's an FDA pathway, then, why do we need to create more stigma?
Yeah, interesting. And I know that there's a lot of people in our community that might feel the other way on this, but I think it's a nuanced issue, right? So we have to think about it. And the way that I personally think about it is maybe a little bit more in the middle of the road compared to you all, in that I think there might have been utility in sort of painting that target that then maybe creates the opportunities to have those proxies set up and say, okay, well, we shouldn't do that, but here's a proxy that we can all use. And maybe that, we don't know what the alternate reality was where people weren't advocating for that, how quickly we would have got to the TAME conversation. But
I think it's because in part we're stuck in this old way of thinking about diseases. I mean, Tina pointed it out, perfectly when she said, Leah, all we're thinking about is how to treat disease, when in fact we should be thinking about how to prevent the things that go wrong with us that lead to disease. And so it's this mindset, I think, that, and I know folks in the aging world like to think of themselves as, light years ahead of everyone else. Yeah, well, when it comes to this particular issue, they're stuck in a very old way of thinking, and I think that in part is the problem. So, and by the way, the FDA is not in our way. They're not standing in our way.
Exactly.
The FDA is completely behind us. So, we don't need to convince them. They've already come to the conclusion that you can develop a therapeutic that influences multiple diseases that are associated with aging. They're already with us.
Yeah, my personal focus in this area, as I mentioned in my conversation with Ron, is trying to work on, like the machine learning based, assisted solutions that will come up with like a reliable, easy way to get enough proxy metrics for the deficit accumulations, et cetera, to target. So yeah, I agree with that as kind of the end result. Sticking on this topic of sort of framing, right? Another kind of issue that's kind of, gone seesawed back and forth in our community over the past years is, lifespan versus health span, right? Some in our field believe that health span must be focused on to be more palatable to the public or policymakers, while others feel that focus on maximal lifespan to some extent is needed to inspire, and that focusing on health span is a disingenuous cop-out. So I'm curious I think I get the sense of where we probably are on the panel here, but does anyone want to jump in on that first?
Go ahead, Tina, or go ahead.
I think most people would say, who wants to live a really long time if you have a crap life? So, listen, we have to get real here. And I think, let's really focus on health span. The side effect will be increased lifespan. And if you are healthy, you're probably going to enjoy your life because you can do more, you can, so I don't know. I just think we want to reduce more, multimorbidity. We want to compress that. All these sorts of things are really, really important. We spend far too much money dealing with that end stage of life. Let's compress that. Let's really focus our energies on keeping healthy and well. And if we do that, chances are we'll want to live a long life as well.
Yeah, I agree, Tina. I think when you're engaging the public or just speaking with people who aren't really familiar with the topic in general, some people kind of have an adverse reaction to the idea of increasing lifespan. But who's going to argue against, having additional healthy, productive years? So typically when I'm speaking with colleagues or just people who are not familiar with the topic, I start by, talking about the leading causes of diseases, sort of the breakdown of our body. I don't even really mention aging at the outset. I just talk about the idea of having, a new class of medicine that can treat the fundamental causes of these horrendous diseases. And as a result, we would have extended years of healthy life. Nobody's going to argue against that. But if you sort of begin the conversation about, we should be increasing lifespan, some people may be uncomfortable with that. So maybe over time, people become more comfortable. But I think in the beginning, as we're trying to reach new audiences, we should be talking about increasing healthy, productive years.
Yeah, look, Keith, people who are coming up with these numbers of 120, 150, 200, whatever, they're all making the numbers up out of thin air. There is no science behind it at all. Radical life extension, and let me be crystal clear about this, radical life extension is an untestable scientific hypothesis. If you had an intervention in front of you that could make you live to 200 years, you wouldn't know it worked for at least 100 years. So it is an untestable hypothesis. We should not be embellishing. We should not be exaggerating. It's not that those of us that are working in this area that aren't talking about 200 or 500 year lifespans are, that we're out of touch with, the latest science, or I can't remember what was the language you used earlier about, putting some goal out there that's ambitious. Oh, right. It was an ambitious goal. It's not an ambitious goal. It's an unrealistic goal. It's a number that you cannot test using empirical methods of science. And so it's the worst thing you could do. And as you know, those that are making these arguments for radical life extension, I come down on them like a ton of bricks for making numbers up. And it's not science. I will tell you, I've got a new paper that we're working on now that I think hopefully will put a nail in the coffin on this issue once and for all, that we shouldn't be talking about these kinds of radical increases in life expectancy because we cannot test them.
Right. So it seems like there's an alignment on the panel here. To share my own thoughts, I obviously wholeheartedly believe in the utility of using healthspan as a successful advocacy tactic, because to the points that you've all made, there's really no arguing with it. It's just objectively good in all ways, personal and societal. The one caveat that I would make, because it comes up sometimes when I'm on a conversation, someone just hits me point blank and says, Keith, what's your desired lifespan, right? I don't, unlike some others in the field, I don't necessarily shy from saying, hey, I love life and I would like the option to defer that decision to my future self, right? And I'm not going to be ashamed about that. And I think some dose of that is required to be inspirational, right? So I don't think we should run away from that question as long as we're realistic, to your point, Jay. So that's
well, unfortunately, there's a lot of unrealistic perspectives in our field, and it gets in the way of good science going on. That's part of the problem, is our own field is loaded with people that are exaggerating or embellishing, and none of it's needed or necessary. And part of the problem is we're stepping on our own feet.
And I agree with Jay. I mean, I think one of the issues that we're sort of confronting is that there's been so much sort of taboos and misinformation associated with the aging community. And that just makes it that much more difficult to engage with members of Congress. No member of Congress wants to go before their colleagues or the constituents and talk about how they're working to increase lifespans to 200 years. They're going to be seen as a kook. But if they're talking about increasing healthy, productive years, then yes, people can get behind that. But I do think we have to be very diligent about sort of weeding out the snake oil salesmanship that's been in the aging community for so long.
Yeah, I want to stick on you, Breanna, because I think I can weave in one of the audience questions that I see. But I first want to inject a little note of optimism in that if you got a chance to watch my talk at the start of the conference, the recent AARP poll showing, very high percentages for people saying that they would take a pill to make them live 10 years longer, even if health was not promised, which was surprising and a big shift from just the 2013 Pew Research polls, I believe. And, in the efforts that I've been doing in the, social media, like the Kurzgesagt videos, et cetera, even videos that have kind of a bolder, I guess you could say, stance, the overwhelming, like 99.9999% thumbs up, movies these days have really shifted their narrative. So I guess my question there, or my open thought is, maybe we don't necessarily have to be as shy as we think with the public. Maybe with policymakers, that's different, but I think the public might be more ready for this than we think. But to switch that to the audience question, that's maybe most applicable to Breanna, is the A4LI doing sort of focus group testing for messaging and that sort of stuff yet? Is that a plan?
Keith, I'm so glad you asked that question. So we've done several polls already, and actually sort of going off what you just said, we have seen that actually this issue is incredibly bipartisan. People are interested in increasing their number of healthy, productive years. A number of people are also interested potentially increasing their lifespan. So all of the polling that we've done so far is incredibly encouraging. And again, what's sort of most encouraging about it is that this issue is sort of bipartisan and also, similar between men and women, similar between age groups. That's all very encouraging. And we will begin running focus groups where we're going to dig into these questions a little bit deeper and sort of find out some of the nuances behind these answers. So we'll be running our first focus group, hopefully this month. And then we'll be continuing to do that on a regular basis. And going back to what Keith said, I think one thing that people sort of forget is, A4LI, we're engaging with members of Congress, but almost the most important thing that people need to be focusing on is reaching the public. Because at the end of the day, people have these misconceptions about how members of Congress don't listen to the constituents, but they really, really, really do. And so if we're going to sort of win this battle and actually create change in Congress, we have to engage the public. And if the public starts demanding these things or talking about increasing lifespan and health span, the members of Congress representing them are really going to start to listen.
Great. Yeah. So same question to Tina and Jay. We have our opinions, but do we have data from, focus group testing?
So I was just going to say, I think the public engagement piece is so crucial. Absolutely. And I think the whole language issue is critical to get right. And I don't think we're there yet. I do know one of the big organizations that I work with, the Phoenix Institute, they've just set up an institute, and they're doing quite a lot of testing of language at the moment to see what really resonates and engages with the public, have a much more positive, optimistic view of what growing old is about. And so these are the sorts of things that I know are sort of ongoing at the moment, which I think are really, really important, because I just think we need to frame everything really differently. And we need to kind of envisage a world which is much more optimistic and positive. And just, because I think the mindset shift is just so critical to really, to get the progress that we really need to see just generally with all the stakeholders.
So personally, I thought the best explanation that I've seen, which was such a simple, elegant explanation that Tina gave, was how we think of health, right? If we only think of health as treating disease, which is what you said, and you're right, then that's part of the problem. And changing that mindset from thinking of health as from just treating disease to preventing disease or enhancing health, I think is a fundamental change, which I think Tina is, that's the point that you're making. And I couldn't agree more. I think that is foundational to our thinking. And if we could find a way to get that concept of health changed to your vision, Tina, I think that would go a long way.
Piggyback on that.
Everyone needs to engage with it as well. Everybody needs to engage with it as well. It's not just you fix me. It means I have to be part of the solution.
Yeah. So I haven't thought about it before, but given what you both just said there, it made me think of that this also creates an excellent way to engage a broader global community, right? Because this idea of health as disease fixing is, more of a Western medicine idea, and Eastern traditions maybe look at it more in this holistic way, right? So maybe that creates a way to kind of bring in more people into our shared tent, that ideology. So, and on that subject, this can tie into the last question that I had before. Maybe we take some audience questions. Given that the engaging of the public is so important, as we've all just said, what are some ideas that we have for the most effective way that a person, let's say not deeply entrenched in our field, but interested and supportive, can do to support achieving the longevity dividend? Is it just contacting their congressperson and letter writing campaigns, or is there other things that people can do?
I can go ahead and hop in. So again, I feel like a broken record because I've said this so many times, but really members of Congress do listen to their constituents. So if somehow by some miracle, we could get all of the American public to write their member of Congress about this issue, then, within a couple of weeks' time, there would be potentially movement in Congress. So you really do have the power to make a change. So engage with your member of Congress. And on that note, A4LI, we're competing with a lot of other advocacy organizations out there. So Dylan said this earlier today. Each issue has an advocacy organization behind it. And at any one time, a member of Congress is being pulled into a million different directions, and they're going to focus the most on the issue that their constituents are talking the most about. So again, if you're listening to this, please, write your member of Congress, become a member of A4LI, sign up for a newsletter, and you can find other ways to support the cause as well. But you truly can make a difference just by engaging in the political process.
Great. Tina, how about you?
Yeah, I think so much is about, spreading the word. It's about engagement. It's about education. So I just think, the media needs to be educated. And because I get so tired of just seeing the same old stuff being written about by the media, that's all about it. They perpetuate some of these ideas. It's fun, it's interesting, it's kind of like whizzy, it's wow, it's like, the latest thing that will extend your life by whatever. But, I just think we need to be positive, optimistic. We need to be based in the evidence. We have to, spread the word. So I think it's everyone, I think the media is really key to this. I think, and I agree with you with Breanna, I think, engage with your politicians. They're part of, they have to be engaged with, they have to be also educated. And because, there are so many things, there's so many developments taking place at the moment. So I think the scientific community needs to do more about spreading the word and communicating with the general public about the work that they're doing. So I think, the educational piece is really crucial. And I think also it's a shame we need more education also in the schools about, the incredible developments we're seeing in science. We need to enthuse young people. And again, link it with the whole climate change debate, I think is one way of doing it as well. We just need to spread the word on the optimism that is here because of the science and the technology. It's just,
Makes sense to me. Jay, any new ideas or seconding that?
Yeah, I do this one lecture at a time, right? I get invited to give presentations all over. So every single time I am giving a presentation at a conference, I will advocate for geroscience, the longevity dividend, to get people to understand the logic and the rationale behind it in a way that's similar to what I just presented earlier. I do it one interview at a time. So I do a lot of interviews with the media. The media is notorious for, ageism and exaggeration. And so I am one interview at a time. I work on each one of these reporters and I go, yeah, you really shouldn't be using this language. And this is the reason why. And so it's just one person at a time, one conference at a time, one interview at a time. Every once in a while, someone will ask me to meet with some member of Congress, and I will almost always accept an invite like that. But that's the only way I know how to do it. I'm not interacting with high school kids, although I wouldn't mind doing that. But it's just one at a time.
No, to second the sentiment here, and it's also obviously a key part of what we do at Lifespan.io in educating the public. One of the things that I think can happen when you've been deeply entrenched in the field for any length of time is you kind of just sort of tacitly begin to think that everybody knows what you know. But anytime we make a large video like what we did with Kurzgesagt or the ones that we're making with Life Noggin now, I'm always shocked by how many emails or follow-up messages I get from even other researchers in adjacent fields that were like, oh, like I didn't know that this field has progressed so much. Like that educational mission is never over. And I think that those kind of initiatives have really kind of, whether you can track it or not, has brought in so many new advocates, investors, researchers too, into our field. So obviously a big seconding on anything to do with educating the public. But with that, Oliver, if I could summon you to see if there's any questions from the audience. And I think Tina has time pressure. So if there's any that are specifically to her, feel free to address those first.
Yeah, so let's take a look here. I got some scrolling up here. Let's see. So I have a question. Let's see. Sometimes they start off as a statement. So, so I have to read through it to make sure that's what we have here. Okay, so China and other dictatorial countries with relatively homogeneous populations are proceeding with human trials and other means of rapidly developing vastly superior redesign of the human body as part of its plan to, this is getting really extreme, is this a real question here?
I think the question is probably if other countries are focusing on like genetic engineering and we're not, does that create anything that we need to worry about in terms of disparities? I'm guessing.
Yeah, I guess the question here is that is there an ethical danger here with certain countries? I mean, pushing the barrier maybe too far, and in certain directions and using certain applications and how that might negatively influence the field. I know, Jay, you mentioned not overselling, but we have seen examples where people have taken certain experimentation too far, and that might backfire on an entire field. So,
well, germline modification would be a serious breach of some of our basic principles, and I don't know if China's any further ahead on germline modification than we are in the United States, but I think that would be a serious issue no matter where it happens. How you explain to people what the difference is between manipulating a germline and manipulating a soma, getting people to understand the difference between the two. And we're into soma modification, not into germline modification. So, as for good science going on, it should happen everywhere in the world. I don't care where the developments happen. If they're in China or Vietnam or the UK, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It benefits all of humanity if an intervention comes online that modulates aging. I don't know whether China's any further ahead in doing something that's unethical or not. I don't know. But I would certainly be an advocate for anyone in any country pushing legitimate science in the field of aging.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a direct answer to that question, but what I will say is Tina made this point earlier. If you have a healthy nation, you're going to have a stronger nation, a more productive nation. You're going to have your economy will be stronger as well. And we see China, we see Saudi Arabia beginning to put a lot of money into aging research. So not that there should be any sort of arms race, but that should, make members of Congress and just the U.S. government in general pay a little bit more attention to this issue, because we want to have in the U.S., we want to have a healthy and productive nation, and the chronic diseases are just going to slow us down.
So the only, I agree with everything that's just been said, but I would just say, and this is something that I wrote about in my book on AI, is that China are absolutely galloping ahead in AI. And of course, they're gathering quite a lot of data on their citizens. They have it, it's much easier for them to do it just because of the way that they run things, and with social credit policy and all the rest of it. And with WeChat, there's all sorts of reasons why they're able to be very, very leading and cutting edge on the whole AI, and of course with data. So I just think that's something to watch.
I'm not sure an arms race would be a bad thing. I mean, I wouldn't mind. I like the idea of competition. Well, let's see who can get there first. To me, that's appealing.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on those points, because number one, I was just gonna say what Jay said, in that I think this is actually can spell out a tactic that we might be able to use like intra-country as well. Like, for example, if we were able to present some statistics that showed, I'm making this up here, that New Yorkers have a 10-year longer lifespan than Floridians, right? Maybe Floridians would demand some action, right? So maybe we can actually pull that tactic inside. But in terms of sort of the negative aspects of the question that was just presented, to loop back on earlier conversations from yesterday and tomorrow at the conference, this is where I think decentralized science can really help out as well, to kind of create those like open source vectors where the benefits can be spread around and centrifuge to the world.
Can I just add to that point? Unfortunately, I will have to go after this point. I'm sorry. We're 5 hours ahead in the UK, of course. So I've got a commitment. But so this federated, decentralized approach to data is something that I'm very focused on in the UK scenario. So we've got concepts like trusted research environments, which is really taking off, and a federated network of trusted research environments is something that we're looking at in terms of being able to share and access public sector and private sector data to spearhead and drive aging research and biomarker research, etc. So this will be all part of this Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission Blueprint that we're putting together, and taps into some of the stuff that I've already spoken, I think, at Lifespan and also Keith, about this Open Life Data Framework project that I've been involved with, where we're taking ideas and models from other sectors into a whole new way of seeing the data ecosystem and making it much easier to share data. So a really, really interesting point to make. I think that can really unlock and unleash a lot of innovation. So we're very, very focused on that in the UK, and very much want to collaborate internationally as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for your time, Tina. Oliver, is there maybe one more question?
Yeah.
Jay and Breanna, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, we got one question directed specifically to Jay.
So
but
I will leave it now. Is that okay? I'm so sorry. Is that okay? So thank you so much, everyone, for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, just to piggyback on what everybody else said, and going back to the question of worrying about kind of an arms race and being overtaken, I do think that's a good thing. I think if everybody looks over and the science gallops away in China, and everybody looks and says, oh my God, they're all healthy and look like in their mid-20s, then maybe that'll encourage everybody else to do the same. It's certainly better than a nuclear arms race. Anyway, question for Jay. Given that talking about radical life extension in numbers is unscientific and untestable, years extended, et cetera, doesn't that mean that we need extensive biomarkers and tests that can determine the physical differences between young and old people, and thus judge the effectiveness of interventions that repair these differences?
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's the way to go. In the end, if you're pushing health span as your metric of success, you need to have scientific ways of measuring it. And that's exactly what whoever's asking the question, that's exactly what they're talking about. So absolutely, that is exactly what we need to do. And we need to be able to detect and measure differences over short time periods. And the research designs need to be set up so that they're not just focusing in on people of a specific age, but people of a broad range of ages. So you could detect differences in health span quickly across the age span. Young, middle age, older individuals. The research design is critical. That's part of the discussion that we were having with the FDA, is how to create a research design to actually carry forth a testable hypothesis that can yield results in a short enough time period to know whether or not it's working. So yeah, right on target.
And just to jump onto that question, because I think there might have been something in the spirit of that question as well, is that obviously not anytime soon, but given enough time, 50 years of doing this with accurate biomarkers, then maybe those biomarkers themselves could become a proxy for actual lifespan. Although, to your point, Jay, I don't think that's going to end up being a meaningful distinction. I imagine that the things that are going to extend your health span will be the things that extend your lifespan.
Well, look, my friend Steve Horvath is working on one now, and I think he's barking up a really profitable, interesting, fascinating tree. And so it's just one of many biomarkers. You know, one that I'm involved with is face age, and recognizing that the face is a viable biomarker, giving you some sense of rate of senescence that's going on. So there's lots of pathways that we can pursue that can give us a sense of rate of change. And I like them all. I mean, let's pursue all the scientifically valid pathways that will yield something that will tell us whether or not interventions are working.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you know, that's an area of passionate interest to myself as well. But to kind of round things out, I guess we'll just last words. Breanna, is there anything you want to kind of showcase or let everyone know to check out, to find out more about how to get involved with your work, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think, A4LI, we haven't even been around for all that long. And so far, the results of our work have been extremely encouraging. As we sort of discussed today, this issue is incredibly bipartisan thus far. And we've seen, a willingness of members of Congress to work with us on this issue. So I'd say be hopeful about the future. And again, we could really use your support. So just go on to a4li.org and become a member. We could really use the help, but the future looks encouraging.
Absolutely.
Well, check out the latest language. There should be language in the next appropriations bill that already supports what we're talking about. This was an initiative from the American Federation for Aging Research. We already succeeded in doing this. So, it's already happened.
So final words from you, Jay. Is there anything that the public can do to help you succeed further in what you're doing?
God, yeah. That's an interesting question. It's pretty rare I get a question that I haven't heard before, but that would be one of them. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how the public can help me personally advocate for this. I write papers, I do research, I communicate. The work that I do is try to make complex concepts simple. And this whole concept of the longevity dividend in geroscience is a very complex concept that a lot of people don't quite comprehend or understand. And it's easy to misinterpret or suggest that we're trying to make people live to 150. So no, I'm not asking for money or anything like that. Just sort of read our papers and push forward.
I'll go back to your earlier point you made then, Jay. Then I guess the ask is just get educated and have conversations with people, engage them in conversations at the very least, right? I think this has been an excellent panel. I hope the audience enjoyed it. I'd like to thank everyone for participating, our sponsors and heroes for making this possible. And obviously, again, our work at Lifespan.io, engaging tens of millions of people in the public, is directly related to this topic. And if you'd like to help us do that, go to Lifespan.io and learn more about our initiatives and help us. And again, Oliver, any last points from you? If not, we can wrap up this panel.
No, I think that's it. I think we just have one other question, which is, should the public reach out to their congressman and encourage and demand more funding for aging research? Do you think that would help?
Yes.
I think that answer is unequivocally yes from everybody on the panel.
All right. Couldn't hurt. Go forth and poke your congressman and let them know that more funding is needed to to solve this impending crisis.
Right.